So how is our data analysis influenced by our conceptual framework? Well, I mean, we went into this fairly positivistic in our approach here. The research team, consists of a lot of different people, a lot of different backgrounds, but we had a pretty clear framework that we were going in with. So, when it came to coding a lot of our data and that sort of stuff, we had a set of codes and framework that we were kind of working with. It evolved a little bit over time based on the information that we were receiving, but we were, because of this comparative case study that we were kind of taking, we chose to be pretty clear in terms of how we were conceptualizing things and how we were kind of categorizing our results and our findings. To pick a particular method and talk a little bit about how we worked with the data and try to make sense of what we had. The semi-structured interviews were quite interesting because you had people from different organizations, with very different experiences in terms of their and very different mandates in terms of their involvement in sport participation and trying to promote that. And then even within each organization, you had people at different levels of the organization. We had some very senior level executives, as part of the paid staff. We had some middle and frontline executives. We also had volunteers. We also had participants within these organizations. So, although we were looking at organizational culture as a whole, we also had to be cognizant of the fact that there could be subcultures within each of these different areas in the organization. So, we worked with NVivo in terms of trying to work with the coding. We had 2 people that were basically responsible for that, so there was some consistency in the coding. But when we were going about it, we tried to tease it out a number of different ways, both trying to understand that case study of the organization and what that culture looks like, but then also teasing that apart further to try to understand the different levels of complexity within those organizational cultures. So it was very timely. It was a lot of back and forth between the 2 coders, and then the rest of the research team would weigh in when they had concerns. You had some NSOs. We had, I think we had one set of NSOs where some of the interviews were done in French. So we also had language because these are national sport governing bodies, and we have 2 languages in Canada. So we had to be cognizant of that and doing the translation of the language. So there were a lot of complexity. There's a lot of language there that we kind of had to work through. And then ultimately trying to triangulate that with some of the other data that we had. We had a lot of our notes from our site visits that we brought into NVivo and tried to kind of match those up with some of the other codes that we had. So it was a long process. And then again, from an ethical standpoint, sometimes we had to wait a long time to get the approval to start working with some of the data, making sure that it was accurately depicting what they wanted us to know about the organizational cultures at the various NSOs. At the outset, when we were trying to identify which NSOs to approach, one of the criteria was they had to have received funding from Sport Canada for this initiative known as the Sport Participation Development Program. And this was a sort of a very narrow window of funding that was provided. And what was interesting, and again, I'm not sure we would have known this had we just relied on the information that was proposed on the web or provided on the website, is in some cases these programs were already existing and they were simply using the funding that was provided to further develop these programs. I don't think the funding was actually intended to be used in that way. The funding was, I believe, primarily intended to introduce new programs that would help bring new people into the fold. But the way that they spin it sometimes in the way they communicate on their websites and other media made it seem like it was something new and fancy and they were doing all these wonderful things, when in fact they were just doing the same thing. It was just trying to get more funding to do it so it didn't come out of other pools of money and they could transfer those to do other things with it. So that was kind of interesting how you trying to make sense of all of that. And even within that, there were different perspectives within the organization about how they should be using that funding. So managing that was difficult in terms of communicating it to, in publications and presentations, and also back to Sport Canada, who was providing them with the funding, but also providing us with the funding to do the study. So it was a difficult path to sort of navigate.